Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So today's guest on the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast is Theresa Bruno. As the podcast continues to grow, I often receive guest invitations or suggestions, but Theresa stood out. It was her presence and authenticity on her Soul Talk podcast that truly sparked my interest. There was something about the way she held space for difficult conversations that resonated deeply with me. Curious to learn more, we scheduled a preliminary conversation, and after that first chat, I understood exactly why I had felt that spark. Theresa brings a grounded, soulful approach to grief, healing, and transformation, one that blends vulnerability with strength. I'm so pleased to welcome her today and know her voice and story will touch so many of you listening. So a little bit more about this week's guest. Theresa Bruno is an author, speaker, coach, and the host of the Soul Talk podcast. A trained classical pianist and accomplished entrepreneur, she previously led a successful regional marketing firm in the Southeast and founded Jordan Alexander Jewelry, a high-end jewelry brand with a devoted celebrity following. Her designs have adorned icons such as Oprah, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Hudson, Pink, and Michelle Obama, who named her one of her favorite designers. Theresa's life took an unexpected and heartbreaking turn when she lost her husband to suicide. This profound loss reshaped her perspective on success, resilience, and what it truly means to rebuild. She found herself navigating survival, grappling with grief, searching for meaning, and ultimately discovering a deeper purpose. Now Theresa is dedicated to helping others find their way through loss and transformation. Through her writing, speaking, and coaching, she offers a compassionate, real-world approach to healing and reinvention. She is a regular guest on television, radio, and podcasts, and is the author of the book, He's Not Coming Back, Rewriting Life After Loss, A Path to Healing. So welcome, Theresa.
Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. It's so nice to be with you on your show. And, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me. And, you are such a seasoned podcaster and have put out so many wonderful podcasts that help on so many levels, of healing. I just applaud the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. I already said in my intro how my interest was sparked by just listening to you talk about your personal life and also talk to people. So why don't we start with you telling the listener how grief and trauma and loss has been part of your life or has become part of your life?
Yeah. I think that those words, the way you frame them are exactly what grief and trauma are. They become part of your life. And I know you know this integrally from your own losses of your child and your mother. One of the things that I'm asked most often by people is, when will this go away? When will this pain end? When is grief over? And what you said is grief becomes part of life. We learn to deal with it. But I'll backtrack into my story. It's kind of a two-parter that one loss doesn't get anywhere close to the second loss. But the first loss put me in a place of shame and isolation. So when the second loss came, I was really not equipped to deal with it. The first loss was I kind of had this fairy tale business that happened just out of a passion for loving jewelry. And I had no intention of starting a fine jewelry line, but it got fed by celebrities and press. And so I had this wonderful sort of Cinderella story of this little small creative business becoming, on the front cover of almost every major fashion mag for a little while. And I lost that business to fraud
Mm.
from most trusted employee who was also a friend. There's betrayal, there was loss of friendship, and then the fraud was so deep and it had been going on underneath my nose for 2 years. And I
Mm.
will speak to that to say I was running two businesses. I'd had a successful marketing firm for about 17 years, maybe at that, no, maybe more like 12 years at that point. And so, I was the creative nexus for two businesses. And so I was running, doing, and I loved it, but I couldn't fully be present. And I can look back and see that I thought I was. But if I had been just doing the jewelry business, I think I would have had more of a sense of what was going on underneath my nose. But the
Mhm.
fraud was so deep and so great that I could either bankrupt the business, which just wasn't in my kind of DNA to do, or I could try to pay off all the debt that this person had created, but I had to shutter the business to do that. And to tell you, it was one of these things, Natalie, you say Natalie, yes. Um, I had not really failed in life at that point. I had sort of kept all the balls, all the plates in the air. And I had my definitions of success. And I had this amazing man who was my best friend, my husband. I had these two cool kids. And yeah, they did all kinds of crazy things wrong, and I mean, marriages all have ups and downs, but I had a life I felt like was going well. And then I had this business loss, and I was just shrouded in shame because I felt like I'd let down so many people who had believed in me, my investors, all the stores who had chosen that line when they could have chosen someone much more famous, or, the people who wore the jewelry and bought it. And I just walked away from there. I'd lost a sense of identity and grounding as a business person. And I was just closing the second store and really shutting down the business. And that was in February of 2020. And then COVID was announced in March. And in April, my precious husband of 29 years took his life
Mm.
very unexpectedly. Again, looking back, I can see signs of a greater depression than I realized. I knew he was down and we were in therapy, but I just didn't think suicide could happen to our family. We put our children first. Everything was about raising up these two beautiful humans we've been given. And I just honestly, it never went between my ears that either one of us could make that choice. Um, and so then, you take a person who's already pretty down and has isolated herself because of the shame of what happened with this business. And then everything I ever knew myself to be, everything I counted on, what I built my life on, this marriage, this family, the trust of all of that, it just shattered. So that's the beginning of the story of grief and loss for me.
Mm. But it's big. I mean, it's compound losses in a very short amount of time. And I mean, you just described it in a very clear way. It's different elements of yourself that are being affected: your personal self, your identity as a businesswoman, as a mother, as a wife, in that partnership. I mean, just hearing that, and it's 5 years ago, and still seeing you here today, I just want to stay a little bit with Theresa 5 years ago, around that time. How did you deal with that in the first period of it?
The first days, as you well know, are just shock. And you just can't find the ground. I couldn't find the ground.
Yeah.
And I had started isolating coming out of the loss of the business. And then COVID, everybody was isolating, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So for instance, like to do his funeral, he came from this wonderful, huge Italian family, very well known in the community. You know, he had fraternity brothers, he had a beloved church community. Well, none of those people could be there to celebrate his life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we could have 10 people, and that included the priest. And so everything was isolated. You know, instead of people being there and being helpful or, you know, having arms around me and hugs and places to put my tears, I had my children and I had myself.
And as we know, community is so important in such a
Oh,
moment.
important. I want your listeners to know whatever they're going through, because we're all suffering something. I believe we're all surviving something. Um, and it can be the loss of a job, it can be the loss of a pet, and it can be these huge losses like both of us have suffered. But we're all somehow in this life surviving something. I think one of the most important things you can do is find an incredible therapist who can help you through it, walk you through it, be there for you. And I've heard you say on your podcast, you know, it's not every therapist that deals with grief and trauma well. Find someone who really deeply does that work.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you share with your therapist, but also find your community where you share your pain. And don't splatter it. Everybody's not ready to receive it, but if it's a trusted family friend or friends, if it's a trusted friend or friends, but people you feel safe with, and share that pain, because in sharing the pain, this is one of the core, I guess, tools that helped me ultimately begin to find a walkout. When you share your pain, you lessen its power. Because the other person begins to take some of it for you, you know, and they help you walk out of it. So yes, community is so important. But to go back to your question, how did I begin? The first days,
I mean, especially given the fact of it being, as you were saying, everyone isolating.
yeah,
And yes, community can be to some degree achieved by being virtually together as we are. But how did you deal with it at the time?
I had two boys. Neither of them lived at home at the time. One was away at college, and one was already moved out of the house. But the one who was in college came home and lived with me for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Immensely helpful. And little things, I began to do little things just to, because I knew I couldn't just cry and lay in the bed all the time. And the thing that motivated me the most were my boys. It was like, okay, however I go is how they're going to go. And I might need to go into my bedroom and cry a lot of the time and be completely bereft. But I needed those guys, those young men, they were both in their early 20s, to see that we could keep going. You know, I didn't sort of have any meat on the bones of that, so to speak. But later I began to say, okay, we're not lost as a family. We can still be a family, even though dad's not with us. We can take forward all the gorgeousness. He was an amazing, kind, just the kindest human I think I've ever known. And he gave us so much of that. I was softened by him. James just brought so much goodness into our world. So I wanted to carry that forward. But what I was trying to go back and say, there were teeny tiny things that helped me in the early days and I mean it, just survive. And one was I loved the view out the window of my bedroom. So if I could make myself take the 3 steps from my bed to the drapes and open them, it shifted my spirit. It shifted me psychologically from only thinking about me and my sorrow to just at least going, this is beautiful. It's just a millisecond of a shift, but it's a breath that's not sorrow.
Absolutely. So what you're describing is a glimmer, and it's really important to notice those glimmers and to make use of those glimmers. And you're describing a really gentle little step into, changing from laying down to being up a little bit. And I think it's important for people to know and understand, because yes, at the beginning, and most of those or all of those listening will have an experience that has allowed them, I want to say, to experience what we've experienced or to know where we're coming from. But it's also important to know, so what are the little things like, and in polyvagal theory, we call them the glimmers, to be really aware of what are the little things that shift our nervous system to help you regulate from a dorsal space, from a survival space, from an activated space to a more regulated place and space.
And the second thing was I was determined, like I said, and it was a gift that I had one son who moved back, but I needed my boys to think that I could be okay, because I knew if I wasn't, they wouldn't be, and their lives would begin probably to fall apart. And psychologically, they would allow that because mom was allowing it. So I would make myself put on my robe in the morning, at least brush my hair and brush my teeth, and walk down the hallway to make coffee. It sounds so little. We make coffee every day. We don't think anything about it. It took all that I had in a morning just to do that one thing. But it said to the boys, mom's up, mom's making coffee, the day is starting, instead of, we're in chaos.
Mm.
And just opening the drapes and then willing myself to make coffee were the first little things I did in those first days.
Yeah. So in terms of having your boy there, so one of them, and I suppose you were in contact with the other boy, you mentioned 2 boys, right?
2 boys.
That's an experience for people to understand. It's really important to have a co-regulating person there. With co-regulation, we also help the nervous system regulate. And
Exactly.
if it's not possible to have someone there physically, it's good to have those support people and giving them the tools to say, look, just check in with me daily, or come over, just sit with me, because that is really important. That's a good way to help the nervous system regulate.
100%. And friends came into play, even though it was COVID. I have one friend, Marie, and she was a good friend before James died. And we saw each other socially, and she was actually James' cousin, and she absolutely adored him. But from the day he died until this very day, Marie has not missed one single day of texting me and saying, "How are you doing today? What can I do for
Wow.
you?" I mean, and it's been 5 years. It doesn't matter where I am in the world or where she is in the world, I'm going to get that morning text. And at first, I have to say, bad on me, some days it really annoyed me. I would be like, do not ask me how I am. I'm terrible and I don't want to talk about it. Just leave me alone. But it created this, kind of thread of okay, she's showing me she's willing to always be there for me. And I'm learning that even if I'm terrible and I don't want to talk to her, just getting that text gives me, as you said, another glimmer. It was just a little hopefulness. There is somebody out there. And the fact that she had loved him so much, she understood my loss, probably in a way that some others might not have. She understood what an amazing man he was, And it was interesting because once I began to be able to get outside of the house just a little bit, we obeyed kind of the laws of distancing, but we would sit on her screened-in porch, me on one end and her on the other end. And she was the one place I could really talk about it. I could talk about him and not feel embarrassed, because I felt like in the early, months of grief, the people didn't want to talk about it. They were afraid to talk about it. It made them uncomfortable to talk about it. We as a society don't have much of a language for death and grieving, certainly not a language for suicide.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But Marie had loved him and known him well, and she knew our marriage. And, I had, as anyone with suicide has, you just get, overwhelmed with why. Why did this happen? How could I not have seen what was coming? What could I have done to help it? What could I have done differently? What was there that I didn't see in our marriage? All that stuff that runs through her head. And those questions are never answered. You never really get answers to those. But she was a place I could sit there and really talk about my marriage um and I could just let it all go. I could grieve. That one friend became a lifeline.
Hmm.
There
So,
were many others, but
yeah.
the consistency of her. So if I want your listeners to hear that if you have a friend who's suffering, even if they don't give you good responses back, like I gave her crappy responses back a lot of the time, or I even didn't answer her rude, but just consistency when someone is in grief is so important.
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazing friend to have. Not everyone has such a consistent friend as you do, but I so find that important to help people understand who've experienced grief and loss and trauma, to then maybe be that person lending a hand and showing, I'm still here, I'm still here, I'm still here. And I mean, the English question, how are you doing, is another way to say, hello, I'm here, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's so much better.
Mm.
Hello, I'm here for you today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So if we're thinking about Marie, was her name, right? And
Yes.
the way that your communication went and the way that she was there for you, what, if you're looking back to it, what has really helped you in her presence, in the way that she was present, in the way that she was attending to you?
I think I was judging myself so harshly coming out of the business fraud, and I call it a failure. But I'm not sure that's really how I want to present it to the world, because it was one of the most wonderful teachers. Losing that business was a wonderful teacher for me, which then is not a failure, right? But I was at that time judging myself so harshly. I didn't have a lot of self-compassion. And the constant whys of why did this happen? How could this happen? All of that kind of thing. Marie held space for me that was the antithesis of that. She was not judging me. She didn't need to know details or dig more, or, she didn't want to know the gory details of what it was like to find him, because telling that would just break me in half. I think the thing that was so healing with her is that she held me in a space that didn't judge me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, as most of the listeners here know, I lost my mother from suicide. And although that was the reason she died, or the way that she died, I mean, the depression was more the cause of death in the long or in the wide sense. And similar to you, there's conversation that never happens, and some conversation you have that you wish you never have. And I think the stigma around suicide brings an added layer to loss, in the sense of people don't know what they can say, what they should say or shouldn't say. And you, as you just described, what is very common is the sense of guilt of what could I have done differently, the ruminations about the cause and the potential for something different to have happened. So in my case, it was my mother, and my father found her. My father had more of, or still has some of, the ruminations. And I think talking to you, it opens a beautiful perspective of 5 years, because where you are now gives such a bridge of hope and perseverance and resilience. So if we were to build that bridge to the now, how did you build the bridge? How did you walk over the bridge to where you are now, where you're actually holding a podcast talking about these difficult
I wasn't good
things?
at first. When I look back on like the first year and a half, almost 2 years, I was pretty terrible at it, because I did isolate. I sat alone a lot. I thought a lot. I wouldn't advise people to be as alone as I was in the first 2 years. And when I say alone, here's a caveat though. I still had a sizable marketing firm to run. So I had to get up every morning. And even in COVID, I was on Zoom all day long. I had to be there for employees. And I had a lot of young women working for me. And they were terrified for their jobs, um, thinking that maybe I couldn't pull it together and run us. I had one particular client that was very, very large client, and it's deadline driven, deadline driven, deadline driven. How fast can you get out ads, commercials, that kind of thing. No time to think. I had to be in charge. I had to be running. So when I say I was alone a lot, I was alone a lot when I wasn't working.
Yeah.
And ultimately went back to the office. But that was a really pivotal part of my journey. I had lived so much of my life being defined by success, being defined by, you know, how great could I help this business build? Could I do the most gorgeous commercials and get all the awards, And then I built the jewelry business. Could I create the most magnificent designs, And could it all be monetized in a way that made me feel successful?
Yeah.
After James' death, I would go to work every day and I was still working very hard and very driven for the client. But I began to feel, money matters, money's energy, money's how we, operate in the world. And I needed to provide for myself and to continue to provide for my children. But I didn't, those things my value system began to change very quickly. And so after about 3 years, I sold my business. And I could feel the whole time that I was being pulled to do something different. And I would sometimes write for about the first, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. James died on a Saturday morning in April. So on Saturday mornings, I would write to him. And that might sound like the most macabre thing in the world to do. But I'm one of these who believes that spirits live after they leave this earth and that they continue to communicate with us. And so I would write to him and I would say, help me make sense of this. There's got to be more in this world than me just surviving the loss of the person I loved the most, the person I built my life with. There has to be something on the other side of me. Help me. And, the more I could talk about it, the more I began to see, as I said, people would just come to me with their stories. People needed to talk about who they had lost, or that they were going through a divorce, or that work was just so hard. And those sound small compared to what I was going through, but in actuality, I had so much empathy for other people's pain because of what I was going through. And so I began to be pulled in another direction, and that other direction first manifested as I just want to create a space for people to talk about all the hard stuff and hopefully to give a lift and to say, we're not just surviving, we can thrive again. There is joy again. You still walk with the grief in one hand. It's alongside you, I believe, in some way forever. But there is still life. We can still live. We still can make family, we can make business again. So the podcast started because my entire value system changed, and I wanted to make sense of this tragedy and this grief, and I wanted to create space for others to share theirs.
So basically the birth of the podcast was this new thing, that resource that helped you, or that was a stepping stone on that bridge.
Yeah. And, I had gotten a lot of, I had really been flayed on social media when I closed the jewelry business. And that is hard. That's hard to take when people write all kinds of erroneous things about you. They don't understand. And those kinds of things hurt me very badly. And so I was really reticent to do anything in the digital world because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to get, beaten up again, if you want to say. So at first, I didn't have my name on it. It was just the Soul Talks. Now it's the Soul Talks with Theresa, and I got braver as I did it.
Yeah.
And I guess my hope for the podcast and for the book that's coming out is it's not just about my story. Everybody's got a story. I think when you're willing to be vulnerable and tell the raw, messy parts of your story, not the pretty tied up in a bow parts of your story, I think it gives other people courage to walk out of their pain.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole reason for how to deal with grief and trauma, because by sharing how we deal with what's going on, how we have dealt with the things and how we're still dealing with it, that allows people to put on our shoes and say, well, okay, what would that look like for me? Would these shoes fit, or would part of the journey fit for me? And what would not? So what would you wish you would have known at the beginning? So when your business had its fraud incident, or when James died, what would you have wished to know at that beginning there?
I think it's central to everyone's grief journey. It's that it's not linear. It comes and goes. And it's learning to live with it. It's not trying to get over it.
So you mentioned your book before, He's Not Coming Back, Rewriting Life After Loss. And as of recording this, it's to be published very soon. And when this podcast is coming out, it has been published. So what can people expect when they have your book in their hands, or thinking about your book?
Well, thank you for asking. It was at first a very hard book to write. I do tell the story of what happened the day James died. And I tell the backstory, a little bit of the backstory of his life in the first 2 chapters. But starting with chapter 2, it was important to me to share a survival tool in every single chapter. And they were survival tools that I didn't necessarily read about or hear about, or they were things that were very hard fought, for me. And I kind of make fun of myself a lot because, when you grow through a process like this, it is pretty hysterical when you look back at why you did some of the things you did, because everybody in our world talks about gratitude today. And gratitude was a big piece of my journey and still is. But initially, I was just pissed off enough to say grief is not going to kill me, so I'm going to be grateful today.
Of course, yeah.
But so every single chapter has a survival tool. And then at the end, there is, and you can go on my website right now and download for free the survival tools.
Okay.
A sneak peek. And then I give resources I'm a reader. I love poetry. I love classical music. And then so many psychologists and psychiatrists' writings and teachings that helped me along the way. So I give my resources, hoping that others can delve into them and be helped.
So what would be your favorite survival tool? Or the one that has supported you the most?
It's one that you build toward, but I think my favorite would be resilience. I think you walk out at first with just a wobbly sort of, oh, can I be courageous today to make my call? It's a wobbly, but I think resilience is when I'm going to have this repeat behavior. I'm going to keep doing this. And then kind of something miraculous happens. And you go, oh, I made progress. And then you build a little bit more and go, I can thrive a little bit more over here. I love the word resilience. It in and of itself, just talking about it sort of lights up the room for me.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I also speak about resilience in my latest book. And I think, when I look back over my journey, I didn't think I had any resilience. At that time, I didn't feel resilient. I didn't feel I had any desire to make something good of it. But looking back, I can see the ember of resilience that was always there within me. And I can see it in the little bits. Reflecting back is much easier than when you're in it. So I think also for people to hear that when you're in it, it's hard. And you're unlikely to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or when we're talking about gratitude or whatever, it's a question of timing. When we're asking too early about the post-traumatic growth aspect of a loss, it is not the place. And just as how you said it as well, I was just angry. And part of grief is, in most cases, or in many cases, is anger, which is a natural part of it. And given the circumstances, wherever a person is listening, getting up in the morning might be hard, might be impossible. So for those, wherever you are at any moment, sitting up in bed might be one. I had this beautiful feedback, as you remember from episode 100, the woman who shared that she listened to my podcast and it helped her on the day of the memorial of her husband who died. And I actually spoke to her since then. And it was really touching to see how a conversation like ours can actually help someone get up in the morning, because they've taken some little bit gem of wisdom and say, okay, I'll try that.
Yeah. And I would also, if I have one more second, just say to your listeners, give yourself grace. Every day, just honor yourself, honor where you've come, because you're still in the next day. You got through, and one day adds onto the next, and then it's a week, and then it's a month. And each time, really honor where you've come, honor your journey. I really think then you begin to see small miracles that happen in your life all around that, if you can give yourself that grace.
Mm. And to add on to what you just said, it's like you need a special kind of sharpening of your lenses to see the glimmers, because at the beginning they're always there, but the activation system of the trauma and the grief has sort of dulled the whole space, so they're not visible. But as we sharpen our lenses to small gems that we see, small little things, and see them as glimmers, we can actually add every day to a little bit more of that. So thank you. And one of the things I always do, Theresa, at the end, not always, but very often, I ask a couple of questions, rapid fire questions. Shall we do that now? So a short answer, whatever comes to your mind is fine. And it's a beautiful way for people to see what it means to different guests. So the first one is grieving and trauma means?
Waiting.
And healing means?
Walking forward.
And what have you learned about yourself in the light of loss and trauma?
My value system, what I value as important, has dramatically changed.
Absolutely. And what would be one thing you wish people knew about loss and trauma?
It's what I said earlier. It's to give yourself grace in it. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to eat, eat. If you need to sleep, sleep. Listen to yourself and give yourself grace. Don't be in a hurry to meet some kind of standard that is false.
And the last one, what would be one specific thing that has changed since your loss and trauma that you wouldn't want to miss?
Makes me cry to say this. I take much more time for all the little things. I savor a blooming flower in the garden, or time with a new puppy, or just a sweet conversation over coffee. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It's the little things that bubble up every day that I treasure in a way I didn't before.
Well, thank you so much, Theresa, for this conversation and for your time with us. And I truly feel that your story is an inspirational one for people to listen to. And I hope that you will check out Theresa. All the links are, as always, in the show notes. And soon we will see your book coming out. As of this podcast being released, it will already be here. So thank you so much, Theresa.
Thank you so much. I've loved every second. You're just a beautiful human. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep reading. I promise it will get easier.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.